Morning, Maddie. I know I just read you a couple stories yesterday, but like I said, I want to get through this project, which is 2.5 more books, before I leave in 2 weeks. So I think I'm probably going to start every day with a little bit of reading from here on. You don't have to listen to these every day. They will, I assume, exist on YouTube forever. So, or at least until Skynet achieves sentience or sapience. Sentience is not really the right word, but that's the word that was in the script. So that's the catchphrase everybody knows. Anyway, we go on. This story is a rather long story. I think it's about 5,000 words, so I may not get through all of it today. It is called An Old Man with No Stories to Tell. Working in the VA, as I was when I wrote this all at my desk on the surgery floor at the Iowa City VA in my spare time. And you hear a lot of war stories. A lot of old veterans really enjoy the VA because they get to sit for hours and hours in the waiting rooms waiting for their appointments, and they get to tell each other their war stories. And back home, of course, everybody's heard these stories. They don't want to hear them again. Grandpa, we don't want to hear about the Battle of the Bulge again. So going to the VA allows them to interact with other veterans, men who know what they've experienced, and they can share their stories. And in mental health, there are actually doctors who are paid to listen to you tell your life story. Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful thing for a man in his 70s. Somebody whose job it is to sit there and listen to you talk about your life. Wonderful, wonderful. I am convinced a lot of old veterans who don't have mental health issues still sign up for mental health care just so they can go to the VA and some educated, smart guy has to sit there for an hour and listen to them say anything they want to say. And it's free. It's paid for by the government, an audience for free for an hour. So yeah, I think a lot of old men do that. So anyway, and I've always been interested in the power of narrative. So I was reading J.D. Salinger at the VA. And Salinger is, easily one of, and perhaps the favorite author of mine. I love J.D. Salinger's work. Not so much Catcher in the Rye. I am not in love with that novel. But the short stories, in 9 stories, something like A Perfect Day for Banana Fish or For Esme with Love and Squalor, is a perfect short story. And the best thing about it is nothing ever happens in Salinger's stories. There's never a plot. Nothing ever happens in Salinger's work. And it's just people talking to each other and people thinking. And it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful writing. And Salinger had PTSD. He had served in World War II. He was, I think, drafted, or he volunteered. Anyway, he turned 18 in like 44, the very end of the war. And he was sent over to Germany, actually after the war ended, right after it ended. And he spoke German fluently. His family, his mother and father were German immigrants. They used German in the home when Salinger was growing up. He spoke fluent German, and he typed 125 words a minute on an old Army-issued manual typewriter, which is an incredible feat. And the Army said, you know what, kid? You know what we want you to do now that the war's over? We've got all these prison guards from Auschwitz and Dachau, and we're going to prosecute the people who committed the Holocaust. But we've told these guys we're not going to prosecute below the rank of lieutenant. So if you're a sergeant or a private, we'll let you go as soon as you tell us your stories. Tell us what happened in the camps. Tell us about the atrocities. Tell us about the murders, in particular, think on your officers. And once we have your testimony on paper, we'll let you go and you can go home. But we need someone who's fluent in German, who types really fast, to sit there hour after hour and listen to these defeated warriors describe the horrific things they did in the war. Tell their stories, in other words. And it damaged Salinger for life. I think he did that for a year. He came back to the States. He was institutionalized, I think. I haven't looked this up in a long time, but he was damaged for life. Salinger was a very, very damaged human being. And in those days, of course, you didn't seek mental health help. You drank a lot, you hid it away, and you screwed teenage girls. In Salinger's case, you pursued romantic affairs, not just sex, but you convinced, teenage girls to fall in love with you because you needed that, because you were scarred, you were damaged. And you also happened to be one of the most brilliant minds writing in English of your period. So anyway, the power of narrative. We are hardwired to accept information more readily when it's delivered through a narrative, a story with a beginning, a middle, and end, sympathetic characters, a compelling plot. All of these things, the arc of the narrative, all of these things contribute to us actually learning better than we do off lists or bullet points. We're just designed to pay attention to, enjoy, and learn from stories. And thus we have a compulsion to tell our stories, all of us. And everybody's got a story inside them. My friend Joe Haldeman said, you've made it as a writer when strangers start coming up to you in busty pose and saying, you know what, my life, I've done amazing things in my life. It would make a tremendous book. Tell you what, let me tell you my life, and then you write it up and you sell the book, and we'll split the money 50-50. People who've never tried to write don't know. Having the idea is the easiest part of it. We all have ideas. We all have lives full of events that would make great stories, but it's the making the story that's the work. Writing it and then selling it. That's the hard part. And these guys want 50% when the author does all of the work. So all of us, I tell this story to illustrate that all of us have lives that would make books. But the work is in the writing. So the stories, we all have these stories we want to tell. So I'm sitting in the VA, I'm listening to all of these old men seeking an audience. They'll buttonhole a nurse on her rounds just to tell her a story, just to hold her there by the bed and make her listen to a story. And so I wrote a story called An Old Man with No Stories to Tell. Why am I not able to see the print this morning? It's very early. Well, not that early. It's about 6. It's 7. My eyes should be working by now. All right, there we go. Now we can see it. Mr. Grosvenor stares at the ceiling over his bed and waits to die. Since the Veterans Administration built this hospital in 1949, many other old men have spent their last hours of their lives staring at that same piece of ceiling. Nobody knows exactly how many. They don't keep those kinds of records. While he waits to die, Mr. Grosvenor mumbles. He can no longer digest food, move his bowels, urinate, or walk, but he can still speak in a papery whisper to which only he is currently listening. It was a beautiful city, he says, his watery eyes fixed on the cross where 4 ceiling panels meet. It was a city built around canals. The canals were clean enough that people bathed in them. Flowers grew on the edges, and walking along a canal was like walking through a greenhouse. It was a small city, green, quiet, peaceful. A nurse comes in and checks the bags from which fluids are pumped into his body. Then she checks the bags which collect fluids pumped away from his body. He looks at her, but he doesn't recognize her. They all look the same. Chunky, solid, strong women in shapeless smocks. with flowers faded pastel by countless washings in bleach. For the most part, they no longer try to engage him in conversation. They all know he's circling the drain. They make him comfortable and they keep him clean. No family has ever visited. There are no personal effects by the bed, no family photographs, no Western novels, no reading glasses, no false teeth in a glass, no Bible. He is the only thing in the room not owned by the Veterans Administration. You could get a rickshaw to take you around the city all night for $1, he says, as the nurse is writing something on a clipboard. She says, and then she leaves the room. A real rickshaw, pulled by a Chinese coolie with bare feet. They had feet like iron. He'd take you to a dance hall and he'd wait outside, take you to another and another until you found a girl. Then take you to a restaurant because in those days you had to feed them. Then he'd take you to a hotel and wait outside again until morning if he had to, and take you both home when you were done, all for just $1. Voices come and go in the hallway outside his room. Footsteps walk or run past his door. Alarms of different kinds go off in other rooms. A disembodied voice makes announcements from speakers at the end of the hall. Mr. Grosvenor hears none of it. His left ear still works as well as it ever did, but he's not interested in the noises in the hallway. He's only interested in the ceiling and in the story that he's telling himself. I met her in the White Leopard. That was the swankiest dance hall in Bangkok right after the war. They weren't supposed to let GIs in there, but we could bribe the kitchen staff to let us in the back way from the alley. Once you were hooked up with a girl, you could go out the front door all right. The White Leopard was supposed to be for the big shots, officers, diplomats, and the airline pilots. But once we were inside, nobody took notice of us, long as we didn't start no fights. Everybody was there for the girls. I used to go with my friend Sam and a few of the other fellas. We had 24 hours of liberty every week, usually on Friday. The other fellas always left with girls, but I always went back to the barracks alone. Because the first night I was there, I saw Mali dancing with some newspaper guy. And I knew I didn't want no other girl but her. Steve's favorite theme. I didn't want no other girl but her. A young doctor comes into Mr. Grosvenor's room and asks him some questions. Mr. Grosvenor does not respond to the questions. He looks at the doctor, but mistakes him for somebody dead, and he begins to cry. The young doctor nervously leaves the room, calling, "Nurse, nurse!" As soon as he leaves, Mr. Grosvenor forgets him and stares at the ceiling once again. Of course, Molly knew who was a big shot and who was just a GI. She could read a man's clothes like I read the newspaper. Know your age, your income, your street address by the time you got done saying, "Hello, baby." You asked to buy her a cola, and by the time the boy brings it over, she knew if you were worth her time or not. Plenty of fellas were left there standing alone, watching her little ass twitching away by the time the boy showed up with his tray of colas. The nervous doctor returns with a nurse. The nurse checks Mr. Grosvenor's pulse, looks at the various bags of fluids, and reassures the nervous doctor. Mr. Grosvenor doesn't notice them. You had to buy him a cola before they'd dance with you. You had to pay to dance with them before you could take them out. I seen her plenty of times at the White Leopard. Hell, everybody knew Molly. She made sure everybody saw her. She was the most beautiful girl there every night. Wore the best clothes, danced the best, laughed the loudest. Always danced with the biggest big shot in the room. I never would have asked her if she wanted a cola if my friend Sam hadn't done it for me. He and the other fellas did it to embarrass me. She was with a bunch of gals over by the bandstand, and Sam went up to her and told her a colonel wanted to buy her a cola. He brought her over to me, and everybody had a good laugh. Everybody but me and Ma Lee. She was real pissed off at Sam for tricking her. I could see it in her face. She was about our age, but she had a much older soul. She didn't like being fooled by a bunch of kids. So she grabbed control of the thing and smiled real sweet at me and said, "You buy me cola, G.I.?" That shut up Sam and them other fellas real good. I was just a kid, grew up on a farm, never been nowhere. No kind of big shot at all. They sent me to Siam because we raised pigs where I grew up, and the Siamese, they love to eat pork. They never were in the war, you know, neutral supposedly, but they let the Japs come build a railway to Burma through their mountains, and the Japanese ate them out of house and home before they left. The whole last year of the war, no supplies arrived from Japan and no money either. So the Japanese troops just started taking what they needed. At the end of the war, they just took what they wanted. Gangs of them went house to house, raiding. Plenty of Japanese soldiers went into the prison camps in Chantaburi in 1945 with gold jewelry up their ass. By the end of the war, everybody was starving. Wasn't but a few pigs left in the whole country in 46. Not even enough to keep a stable gene pool going. Everybody was eating rice with fish sauce and whatever greens they could pick out of their yard. Man can't pull a plow through 2 feet of water, so you can't eat the buffalo. They were eating frogs, lizards, and insects. Pound of pork cost the teacher's whole week's salary. Upcountry people were shooting each other over pigs. So America sent over boatloads of sows and boars from Iowa and a bunch of us green farm boys to teach them Siamese breeding. Weren't no Peace Corps or United Nations back then. It was U.S. Army did that kind of thing. My friend Sam, he's from a farm in Nebraska. He was doing the same thing as me. Had boys over there from Iowa and Missouri and Minnesota, Kansas, sheds full of pigs. It was a damn 4-H fair. We got there and the Siamese government said we had to put all our animals into quarantine for 6 months before we could take them up country. Really, they just wanted to keep the pigs in Bangkok so they could steal them. So there we were, all these young boys, 18, 19 years old. None of us ever been off the farm before. In Bangkok, lots of military pay and nothing to do all day long but slop the hogs. Pretty soon we figured out we could pay local boys to slop the hogs for us, and there we were with lots of military pay and nothing at all to do. Mr. Grosvenor rattles a dusty laugh in his throat. Nobody hears it. The laughter makes his pulse go up and down a few beats, and an alarm sounds over the nurse's station down the hall. He coughs a bit and goes back into his reverie. The alarm ceases. We was all too young to have been in the shooting war, and boy did that sting. Back in the U.S., all the GIs were coming home with chests full of medals. We knew we weren't going to get any medals for teaching Siamese farmers how to tell when a sow is in heat. Word was getting to us from Japan about how it was over there. Tokyo was heaven for a white man with occupation script in his pockets. So they said. We all wanted stories to tell when we got home too. So on Friday night, we'd shave, slap on cologne, shine up our boots, put on our Class A's, and head for the dance halls. That's what Bangkok had for young boys like us, dance hall girls. These girls, they weren't whores. Sure, they slept with men for money, but they were more like movie stars. They were celebrities. Best of them were known all over the city. When you took them out, people treated you better because you were with a famous dance hall girl. None of us boys had ever had girls back home, not for sex anyway. Back in those days, a good girl didn't sleep with you unless she was married to you. So we didn't want some whore for money. We wanted a good girl who put out. And that's what dance hall girls were. Well, that's what we wanted them to be. And for the right amount of money, well, they'd be whatever you wanted them to be. The sunlight coming in the windows and across Mr. Grosvenor's little patch of ceiling has changed its quality, has become milder, more angled, dimmer. A different nurse comes in, somebody from the evening shift, somebody who's never worked with Mr. Grosvenor before. She checks his IV lines, checks the oxygen tube going up his nose, finally lifts the blanket to check his urinary catheter, like every nurse does the first time she sees his penis. She freezes. She swears softly under her breath. She calls out to another nurse who comes in from the hallway. "Have you seen this?" asks the first nurse. "What? Oh yeah, unbelievable, isn't it? I checked his file. He never married. Easy to see why. I couldn't face that every night of my life." "April, I've seen hundreds of dicks in my career working in the VA. You're going to see a lot of them. But I've never seen one like this. Not since I left the farm, anyway." She giggles and puts the blanket back over Mr. Grosvenor, gently and with tenderness. She leaves the room, shaking her head and saying, "My, oh my." When Molly had her cola, I told her about myself. She only took a few sips. They weren't really for drinking. Paying for the drink was how you paid to talk to him. Anyway, she had her cola, and I told her about myself, and I guess she understood a little what I said. She laughed at about everything I said anyway. She understood whatever she needed to understand at any rate, and pretty soon she put down her glass and looked around the room. There still must not have been any big shots there yet, because she said, "Okay, GI, you dance me now." She weren't any older than I was, but she was definitely in charge. She had the highest voice I'd ever heard on a woman. She sounded like Minnie Mouse. But I'd been in the Army nearly a year, and I knew an order when I heard one. So I led her out on the dance floor, and we started dancing. Not really dancing, because I didn't know how to dance. She just let me hug her and sway back and forth a little bit. Mr. Grosvenor's eyes are almost shut. His breathing is shallow. His body is completely motionless. But he's not asleep. He doesn't really sleep anymore, and he never really wakes up either. The corners of his mouth lift slightly in a smile. Papa's people were Irish and German. Mama's folks come from Sweden and Norway. We was all big kids. Worked hard on the farm growing up. Ate good. Grew almost everything we ate ourselves. I was helping to butcher 20-pound hogs when I was in elementary school. Molly didn't weigh half that much. Her head only came up to my chest. She'd reach up her arms and she couldn't put her hands all the way around my neck. Tiniest little thing you could imagine, and so soft, and she smelled so sweet. That first dance, I could look right down the top of her dress, and she had nothing on underneath it. Her boobs were right there, and for a small gal, she had these amazing big teats. I could see everything, and she knew I was looking. She didn't stop me. In fact, she looked up at me over those big, gorgeous boobs, and she smiled like a cat smiles at the canary. I popped a boner right then, and it was like blue steel. She felt it. At first, just made her smile more, but then it kept getting bigger, and she stopped smiling. I never knew how big I was down there until I joined the Army. I thought all men were hung like me. At least my two brothers were. It was during my Army physical exam that I found out I was different. Molly stopped grinning when I got fat, and she sort of got this thoughtful look on her face. She rubbed her belly up against it more, and it just kept getting bigger and fatter, and she got real serious. Suddenly she said, "You tell me that's not now, G.I." I've been watching Molly for weeks in that place, and I'd never seen her leave with anybody, not with any big shot, after just one cola and just one dance. But like I said, I knew an order when I heard one, so I pulled my jacket down over the pup tent in my pants best I could, and I sort of hunched over. Me and Molly led on out of there. I took Molly to Blatong that night. It was the most expensive restaurant in Bangkok in them days. Hell, it was just about the only real restaurant. Normally, you had to wait to get a table, but when I came in with Molly, they took us to a table right away. She was that well known. Blatong was built out over the river on stilts. It's more like what they call a porch back home, but huge, maybe 50 yards on the side. Always had hundreds of people in there, almost all couples, almost all white men and Siamese gals. The regular Siamese didn't have no money to spend on fancy restaurants in those days. All the rich Siamese were still abroad, waiting to see what would happen with the new king. There'd been a revolution in 32, and hadn't been no royalty in the country at all for about 15 years. Then his brother, the old king, he's only in the country for about 2 weeks before he's found dead in his bed. So nobody was sure what would happen with this new king, and nobody rich wanted to be around Bangkok if it was something bad. The only people who went out after dark in Bangkok in them days were foreigners, dance hall girls, and rickshaw boys. The waiters wore roller skates, and they just flew around the place. The sound of them rubber wheels on the wooden floor was like thunder. They had a big fish tank in the middle of the restaurant with giant goldfish in it, some of them 20 years old, big as footballs with foot-long tails hanging down like Chinese fans. Molly ordered a big meal. For a little girl, she could really eat. I had plenty of money. I didn't care. Like I said, you had to feed them in those days. I liked Siamese food too. And they had this great beer back then. Well, maybe it weren't so great, but it was sure cheap. Had a picture of a white elephant on the label, and the king owned the brewery. Molly ate and talked in her pretty little voice about all sorts of girl stuff, but her English weren't so good, and I didn't catch a lot of what she said. I was listening, but I was also looking at her and wondering about what we were going to do when dinner was over. I'd never seen a dirty magazine. I weren't real sure I knew what to do. She knew what I was thinking, of course. Hell, it was her job to read fellas' minds. She kept giving me these looks out of the tops of her eyes, playful little looks, teasing me. She wouldn't let me serve myself. She just had to pick out the best parts of the meal and put them on my plate. She had on this amazing red dress, a real ball gown. In those days, they dressed up, you see. Her hair was all piled up on top of her head. She had on long gold earrings that brushed against where her shoulders met her neck. For some reason, I thought that was the sexiest thing I'd ever seen. There was this crazy band playing American jazz, but with Siamese instruments. It was the funniest thing. La Tong was one of the few places in Bangkok that had electricity after midnight, but not much of it, so the light was always dim and flickering. She looked so beautiful in that light. Never seen a prettier woman, not before, not since. The hallway grows more quiet with the advancing evening. The dinner trays come to other patients, but not to Mr. Grosvenor. He takes his nourishment through a tube that enters above his right clavicle and ends in the superior vena cava of his heart. A nurse comes in and injects some medication into one of the IV lines, and then he's alone again. After dinner, she let me take her to a hotel. It was a small thing, this rickshaw we had, so we had to sit close. We went through a lot of dark stretches of road. Like I said, in 1946, most of Bangkok still didn't have electricity after midnight. City got firebombed by American B-29s in 1944. Most of the city still hadn't been rebuilt. So there were whole neighborhoods that were just fields of rubble. In the daytime, there were still thousands of beggars on the streets with melted faces. We went through block after block of ruins. In 2 years, nature had come back to claim the land again. It was like rolling down trails in the jungle, with every now and then a brick wall around a temple or palace that had stood up to the firestorms. There was no fuel for private cars or boats, and the only movement at night was pushed down the canals with poles or pulled down the road by coolies. It was real quiet in Bangkok at night. I thought once I heard a motorboat, but it turned out to be the wings of thousands of bats flying over us. Someplace along in there, she took my hand and put my arm around her shoulders. She was so small. My hand hung down all the way to her belly. She took that hand and lifted it up and put it on one of her boobs. First time in my life I ever touched one. Swear to God. No sunlight comes in the windows any longer, and the lights in the hallway have been dimmed. It's quiet. No more running feet. No more overhead announcements. The sound of the 10 o'clock news comes from a TV in the day room down the hall, and some machine goes beep, beep, beep. Molly let me keep my hand there. Even let me slip it under her dress and feel her naked titty. That nipple was hard as a bullet. She slipped her tiny little hand into my lap, and brother, let me tell you, I was hard too, and aching. She said something when she felt my cock. I don't know what. It was enough to make the rickshaw coolie turn around and stare at us. I got embarrassed and pulled my hand out of Molly's dress, but she just squeezed my dick and said something to the coolie that made him laugh. He gave me a thumbs up and just ran harder. Mama, she used to do her baking on Saturdays, so we'd have fresh bread for after church on Sunday. I used to watch her and my sisters knead 12 loaves of bread at a time. Mama never worked over a hunk of dough any harder than Molly worked over my old hoss that night in that rickshaw. She used both hands. She squeezed it and stroked it and pulled on it and cooed at it like it was a baby. We went past the movie theater marquee, and under the lights, she looked up at me, and I swear for a moment I thought she loved me. I thought for sure it was honest to gosh love I saw in her eyes. Don't know about that anymore, but seemed so then. We pulled up to a hotel called Ban Rua. And when I got out of the rickshaw, there was no way to hide the bulge in my pants. The coolie cackled like a hen and hollered at some other rickshaw fellas that were hanging around the door. They all took a look and their eyes got big and they made this chirping sound like birds with their lips. They all shouted stuff at Molly and she shouted stuff back and everybody laughed. I figured weren't no point in trying to hide it. So I just marched up the steps into the hotel lobby like it was all natural as all get out. Military pants in them days had these deep pleats. They were baggy as hell. Damn thing stuck out in front of me like the prow of a ship. Desk clerk was this real Nancy boy. Had on eyeshadow even, and he gave me a wink. I didn't mind. I'd been in Siam long enough to be used to ferries out in the open. Bellman took us up in his creaky old elevator, and on the way up he turned and examined his panel of buttons real close so Molly could give my wiener a couple of strokes. She looked up at me again with those big lovey-dovey eyes, and I broke out all in a sweat. We went inside this real small room, clean, but real small. Tiny little wooden bed, made of teak. Everything was made of teak in those days. That's why the city burned so well in 1944. Fire brigades never had a chance. Bed in that room was only about 6 inches off the floor. Tiny little table next to it, tiny stool, everything like in a dollhouse. Molly never said a word to me once we were inside that room. She just started bustling around, putting sheets on the bed, hanging the mosquito net. They had a bathroom down at the end of the hall, and she took a sarong out of her purse and headed off down there. She brushed past me on her way out and gave my Johnson a pat and told me, "What you wait for, G.I.? Get pants off." She had the prettiest voice you ever heard. So she goes out and I get undressed and I put my uniform in this cabinet thing and I get under the sheet. Seemed like a long, long time before she came back. It's very dark now. Mr. Grosvenor watches headlights swing across his porch. Mr. Grosvenor watches headlights swing across his patch of ceiling as an ambulance pulls into the driveway 5 stories below his room. She came back with that sarong wrapped around her, her purse in one hand and a red dress over her arm. She had her shoes in her other hand. Whoop, 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 whoop. All right, hang on. The fan blew the manuscript away. Pardon our technical difficulties. We resume. She had a red dress over her arm. She had her shoes in the other hand, and she put them down outside the door. She moved my boots out there, too. She hung a red dress in the cabinet next to my uniform. She had let her hair down and brushed it. That must have been what took her so long. There was this oil lamp on the little table, and she squatted down and she blew it out. They used to have this grill work in the walls, up near the ceiling, and Siamese buildings in them days. It was a hot country, and you needed to keep air moving. So walls were never really walls, not like we know walls. There were 4 guys having a card party in a room down by the bathroom, and we could hear their voices all night long, just like they were right there with us in the room. She stood up, and I could see her in the light coming in from the hallway through the grillwork. She slipped off the sarong and folded it up real neat. Her hair hung all the way down her back to her little round butt. She stood over me, where I was laying on the bed, and we were looking at each other through the mosquito net. She ran her hands over her body, from her hips up over her boobs and back down again. She said in this real tiny little voice, "You like me, G.I.?" Hell, did I like her? Right then, I'd have give that little girl the deed to Daddy's farm and Grandma's gold tooth to boot. If she'd asked me right then to rob a bank for her, I'd have done it. I answered her, "Yes, ma'am." She giggled at that. Then she got down on her knees and crawled in under the net. She pulled the sheet off of me and reached for my cock. I didn't know what she wanted me to do, so I just laid still. She ran her hands over my dick real soft and gentle. She said something in Siamese, and I swear on Mama's grave, she was talking to my dick. Talking to it, just like it was a baby. Like she done in the rickshaw. Then she bent over and kissed it, and the alarm goes off over the nurse's station. A heavy Jamaican nurse with her hair in beaded cornrows bustles into Mr. Grosvenor's room and puts her fingertips on his wrist. She looks at her watch and she says to herself more than to him, "Now what you doing, Mr. Grosvenor? Why you be all like that now?" She moves her lips slightly as she counts his pulse, and then she drops his wrist. Her experienced eyes have noticed something. She pulls the sheet down to his knees. "Holy Mother of God," she says. She crosses herself. She leaves the sheet down and walks briskly from the room. Mr. Grosvenor takes no notice of her and of her coming or her going. In a moment, she is back with another nurse, this one white and short and stick-thin. They both look at Mr. Grosvenor's groin. "Jesus fucking Christ," says the white nurse. "I'm telling ya, this yar man is 83 years old. He ain't got no business with a chubby like that, not with a catheter up in his bladder. Ain't natural." No wonder his blood pressure fell through the floor. Well, nothing to be done about it, just reflex. Had a fella in here a couple years back, Desert Storm vet with head trauma. He was in a coma, but he still got a woody every hour on the hour. But they'll never believe this on the day shift. "Child, you gonna put this in the report?" "Hell yeah. Nothing else ever happens on nights to talk about." The two women pull the sheet back up over Mr. Grosvenor, again with gentleness and even affection. They check his tubes and his lines and his bags and wipe his forehead with a dry cloth. His eyes follow them as they do these things, but he is seeing things that happened half a world away and half a century ago. The two nurses don't try to understand what he's saying. Mama used to keep her butter churn on the back porch and send me out with a silver spoon mornings to fetch in butter for breakfast. On cold mornings, she'd pour boiling water over the spoon, and I'd run out on the porch while the spoon was still hot, because the butter would have froze overnight. That spoon went into that butter the same way I went into my Lee. Hard pushing at first, then a relaxing, then everything all slippery slidey. She screamed when I got just the head in, and I started to pull out. I didn't want to hurt her, but she wrapped her legs around me and grabbed me by the waist and pulled me into her hard. She was crying and wailing fit to beat the band. Craziest thing, sound to anybody in the building like I was killing the poor little thing. But she wouldn't let me draw back. She kept trying to pull me in deeper and deeper. I'd seen hogs ride to sow since long as I can remember, but it weren't nothing like this. Seen every kind of farm animal there is take his mate. Horses, cattle, sheep, dogs, cats, chickens, they're all the same. Male animals do it rough and mean, when a bull will bellow and stamp and drive a cow to her knees, but she'll just chew her cud the whole time. A tomcat will bite his dam on the neck, and she'll yowl at him, but all the while, her eyes will be watching a blue jay across the yard. Ewes don't even lift their heads from the grass. Most female animals never act like they even know it's happening. But Molly knew more about what was going on than I did. She was certainly getting more out of it. First time, of course, I came right away. She didn't even let me slip out of her. She knew I wasn't going soft, not that night. And she just kept on wiggling, bucking, and whimpering and crying, begging me in Siamese. Didn't know what she was begging me to do, so I just kept on doing what I was doing. I was only 18, fresh from boot camp. Didn't think nothing of doing 100 sit-ups, 50 push-ups, and then run a mile with a 50-pound pack on my back. I'd been chewing tobacco since I was 11. I'd never had a cigarette or a cigar, never touched hard liquor in my life. I had good wind, you see. Good wind. Strong. I was gosh awful strong. I stayed hard and I stayed strong and I stayed inside that little girl all night long. And I never stopped moving. A couple of times she got real still and quiet. I thought maybe she passed out or something, but I kept giving it to her good. And she'd come back to me, whining and whimpering and begging me for something in Siamese. Times be, she'd wiggle around and show me a round little ass and take it like a mare. Times she'd lay on her side with me behind her like spoons in Mama's kitchen drawer. Times she'd put her feet behind my ears or round my back. But most of that night, we just did it normal. Me on top, her on the bottom, her face in my chest, and her legs wrapped around my waist. Wonder I didn't smother that poor little gal to death. Times be, I'd rear back and look down at her, and every time she'd look back up at me with these big dark eyes full of tears. I was just certain that that little gal was in love with me. Outside his window, there's pink sky now. Motion is picking up in the hallway as the shifts change. Phones start ringing in the nurse's station. Alarms start going off. The hallway lights brighten up. Voices get louder. Mr. Grosvenor doesn't notice. In the morning, she pushed me off her and we rested a little bit. I may have dozed off. Next thing I remember, she was up and wrapping that sarong around her again. She went off to the bathroom and I waited for her. I took a look at my dick and wasn't surprised to see some blood on it. That's common with farm animals too. I sure was raw. I'll tell you what, damn thing felt like it was stung by a hive of bees. Molly came back into the room and she gave me this sweet, shy smile. Neither of us said nothing. She had her hair piled up again. I took it from that she meant for us to get up on out of there. I climbed up off the hard bed, feeling like $1,000,000, and I went to the head, pissed like a damn racehorse. Other fellas always said that's what you should do if you lie down with a painted woman. Piss like hell when you're done. because they may have the pox. But I knew Molly didn't have no pox, not her, not a sweet old gal like that. A gaggle of doctors comes into Mr. Grosvenor's room. An old, gray-haired physician who strokes his mustache and stares off into space. A woman in her 30s who reports on Mr. Grosvenor's condition in a rapid voice of authority, which hides the fact that she has not read the chart since yesterday. And 3 first-year residents trying not to look scared. Old doctor hears middle doctor's report, then bends over Mr. Grosvenor and looks in his eyes. Mr. Grosvenor, can you hear me? He leans in, quite close, his ear to Mr. Grosvenor's lips. Who is Molly, Mr. Grosvenor? Is she somebody you want us to call? He leans in again and then straightens up. I'd say we're just a few hours from the end now. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. We'll continue palliative care, and Carol, make sure somebody posts the do not resuscitate card over the bed. I don't want them calling a code blue on this guy. Old doctor looks back down at Mr. Grosvenor and gives his shoulder a pat. The gaggle of doctors leaves the room. The rickshaw boy was asleep in his rig out front of the hotel when we came down. He woke right up and he gave us a big grin. He pulled us out of there, and oh my Lord, I've never felt so good in my life. Morning was about the only time it was really cool enough to wear the uniform in Bangkok. Cool enough that Molly cuddled up against me in the rickshaw in her little red dress. We didn't say one word the whole trip. Rickshaw feller took us down this big, broad avenue, 4 lanes wide, jammed curb to curb with rickshaws and bicycles and a few American Jeeps. Couple of big black sedans that must have been up on blocks, hidden under tarps in some rice barn up country through the whole war. Every bicycle had a little tinkly bell on it. They were all ringing their bells to beat the band. Nobody gave me and Molly a second look. Weren't nothing in those days to see a beautiful girl in an evening dress riding around Bangkok with some man at 6 o'clock in the morning. Pretty soon we went into a neighborhood where I'd never been before. Blocks of ugly 3-story concrete buildings put up in the last year. Already they had red streaks down their sides where the rebar was corroding inside the concrete. Somebody weren't too careful about the mix. Molly got out at a corner and said, "You good man, G.I. I think Molly love you too much. You come see me again next Friday, okay?" Then she was gone into the crowd. We were halfway back to the base before I remembered my voice. We were halfway back to the base before I remembered that I never give her any money. She never asked, and I plumb forgot. I tried to make the coolie go back, but he wouldn't understand me. I felt real bad about that. I planned to go back to the White Leopard on my next liberty, but something real bad happened first. The Siamese boys we was paying to slop our hogs had been selling the oats we brought with us and was feeding our hogs with rice hulls and table scraps from the mess hall. The hogs had suffered in the boats coming over. They suffered with the mosquitoes and the strange water they had to drink. And there must have been buffalo dung on the rice hulls because they all started coming down with the shits real bad. Veterinarians back in Washington said it was probably the swine form of cholera. Boy, you ain't never seen nothing till you seen 500 pigs with explosive diarrhea. Went through our sheds like the Grim Reaper himself. Top brass said we'd made the whole mess by hiring local boys to do our work. They confined us to base and made us clean it up ourselves. Couldn't use the meat, of course. They had to bury the carcasses with a backhoe. We were shooting and burying pigs all day and all night. Took a week to kill them all, and the last ones just died in their pens before we could get to them to shoot them. They decomposed really fast in that heat. The last ones we'd drag out of the sheds by their trotters, and the carcasses would fall apart and leave pieces of rotten meat behind us. When all was said and done, they shipped us out of Bangkok real quick. Some brass was embarrassed and wanted us all out of there. Bitch of it is, years later I was sitting in my dentist's office reading a Life magazine, and I read that the commies had smuggled pigs over the border from China into all of Southeast Asia in the late 1940s, used them to bribe their way into the villages and recruit cadres. They did it over years, a few dozen pigs at a time, and of course, their pigs didn't mind the mosquitoes or the buffalo shit in their food. The pigs over there now are all Chinese stock, not American. It was a good idea. We just fucked it up by trying it too fast and being too lazy. And I never saw little old Molly again. They put us on a boat, and I finished my service on a base in Texas, taking care of Army mules. Because of that, and because of the other thing, folks have called me Muley ever since. I never minded much. I came back to the farm in 48. Honorable discharge, good conduct medal, nothing else. No stories to tell. I did use the GI Bill to buy the farm from Daddy in 59. Turned it into one of the biggest hog outfits in Cedar County. I figured out once that I've bred, raised, and slaughtered more than 500,000 hogs in my life. Started out cutting their throats while they hung upside down from a tree limb. Ended up running them through a conveyor belt by the truckload. Pigs in one end and packages of hot dogs out the other. I sold the outfit when I was 70. I moved into the Lutheran home, been there ever since. Always been active in the Lutheran church. Had a good voice once, I sang in the choir. We went on a concert tour to the Midwest Synod Convention in St. Paul in 65. That, Texas, and Siam, only places I've ever been outside of Cedar County. The room is full of bright sunlight now. Mr. Grosvenor's eyes do not squint. One iris is a pinpoint, the other is wide open. Never had me no other woman, not one. Never wanted one. I was happy with what I got. I got more than most. A pair of nurses, a blonde and a brunette, pear-shaped and reminiscent of a pair of salt and pepper shakers, enter the room with their arms full of clean white bedding. Under the brilliant light from the windows, the blonde takes one side of the bed and the brunette the other. They strip Mr. Grosvenor and bathe him. The brunette says, "Well, Mr. Grosvenor, I hear you had a big night." The blonde giggles and says, "Brenda, hush." The nurses deftly roll him back and forth to change out the linen from beneath him. They examine his buttocks, heels, and shoulders intently for bed sores, but find none. They dust him with talcum powder, dress him in a clean gown, tenderly cover him with a clean blanket, and replenish or empty his various bags of fluids. In 10 minutes, they're done, and they leave the room. Mr. Grosvenor is alone. It was a beautiful city. he says, staring at the cross where 4 ceiling tiles meet. It was a city built around canals. The canals were clean enough that people bathed in them. Flowers grew on their edges, and walking along a canal was like walking through a greenhouse. Why does that make you cry, Steve? It's supposed to be a happy ending. Mr. Grosvenor has a story to tell at the VA. Like all his peers, he has a fairly amazing story to tell. So all the historical facts are gleaned from the books I read in the New York City Public Library in 1988. I don't know how much of it I remembered correctly. I read once in one book about this project with pigs that failed. The U.S. Army trying to curry favor in Southeast Asia by bringing over pigs and teaching Siamese farmers how to grow pigs. And it failed because they tried to do it too quickly. They didn't, take into account disease and stuff. I have no idea how much of that is true. I've never tried to Google it. But I heard a lot of old men tell war stories at the VA. And I had some spare time, so I wrote that. All right, that's an hour. Maddie, thank you again. And as always, for listening to these, I hope you have a great day, bud. Goodbye.